Hey everyone, welcome back to InterviewPro. So far, in the GitHub Actions playlist, we have explored some core concepts like what are jobs in GitHub Actions, how to create dependencies between those jobs, passing data between jobs using job outputs, and reusing steps with reusable workflows. Today, we are taking it one step further. It's time to learn how the entire workflows can share data between each other using workflow outputs. But before we dive in, I strongly recommend revisiting the topics I just mentioned because the examples in this video will be built on those ideas. With that said, let's get started. The example we are going to use in today's video involves a main workflow that receives package information as a comma separated string, something like package 1 equals 1.2, package 2 equals 1.3, something like that. This main workflow then calls multiple reusable workflows. The first job in this workflow is an init job, which is responsible for parsing the input string, figuring out which packages need to be deployed, and setting flags and version numbers as job outputs. The other jobs in the workflow, which handle the actual deployment, will run conditionally based on the flags set by the init job. In the interest of time, I have already created the main workflow, which I'm calling it as workflow outputs.yml init workflow and two reusable workflows, deploy function app and deploy web app. These are dummy jobs for demonstration purposes, but in a real world scenarios, you would replace them with logic to deploy packages to appropriate Azure resources or cloud infrastructure. For now, I am just accepting two inputs called name and version and just printing a message deploying function app if it's a function app, deploying web app if it's a web app with the name of the package and the version it is deploying. Let me show you how init.yml looks like because this is where our actual logic is present. So this is a reusable workflow first of all. So we have a trigger called workflow underscore call, and this will accept one input called packages, which is a required input of type string. This runs on a Windows latest runner because I want to use PowerShell, so I'm using a Windows machine here. The first step is a dummy step. If you have some configuration file which you want to retrieve and then decide which package to deploy where or get the details of function app or web app, you can retrieve from this config file. But for now, this is a dummy step. And this is where I am parsing the packages input that we passed to this workflow. So this will split the package versions by comma and it will store the package and its version in a dictionary called package map. And if the package map contains package 1, that means we have to deploy package 1. So I have a variable called deploy package 1 which will be set to true or false based on whether it's present in this map or not. And I am also storing the version of the package if it's present in another variable called package1 underscore version. Finally, I am setting outputs here in this step. I am setting the output name similar to the name of the variable for deploy package flags. For package version, I just want to show you that you can also give your own name for the variable. It need not be the same name as it of this variable. And I'm using GitHub underscore output to set the step outputs. Now I want these outputs as the output of this job, right? So I have given an ID to this job, which is get underscore packages. Using this ID, I can access the outputs set by this step. So in the output section under the job, init job, I am declaring few variables here. I am using the same variable as that of the step output, and I am accessing the output from the step. So in the steps, I'll go to a step with ID get packages. It has outputs, and the name of the output that I want to use here is deploy underscore package. Similarly, version underscore package. So these are the outputs for this job. Now let's go to the main workflow, which is workflow output.yml. This workflow can be run manually. So there is a trigger called workflow underscore dispatch. This workflow will accept one input called packages of type string, and this is a required input. This is where you pass a comma separated list of packages and their versions. Now this has several jobs. The first job is init. So we know that init is a reusable workflow, and we also learned that in order to access a reusable workflow, we need to use the keyword uses. So I am using the keyword uses and I am passing the path to this workflow. Under .github, we have workflows folder which has init.yml, and that's exactly what I mentioned here. This workflow will accept one parameter called packages, which can be passed using the keyword with. And this is the name of the input, and I'm just simply passing the same input that the user has passed to this main workflow. Then we have other packages like package 1, which is responsible for deploying package 1 to a web app. Then we have package 4, which is responsible for deploying package 4 to a function app. These are just reusable workflows as I mentioned earlier. They accept two parameters, name and version. Name, I just hard coded it, but the version will come from the input. And this input, the version output will be set by the init job. Let's see how it works. Before that, all these package deployments will depend on init. So only after the init job is complete, all these package deployments will begin. Let's see the workflow that I have already run before. Let me open this, and this is how it looks. First, init job will run. If I click on it, I passed an input, which is the list of all packages and their versions separated by comma. You can also see the outputs that this job sets in the complete job. Now, I did not add any conditions here, so all five packages are getting deployed. But ideally, what we are going to do is init job will decide which package to deploy based on the input, and only those jobs will run, others will be skipped. With that context, let's jump into the code and see how workflow outputs actually work in action. Let me go back to the code. So I mentioned that based on the outputs set by the init job, package deployments should run. These flags are set as job outputs in the init workflow. And as we know, job outputs can be accessed by other jobs within the same workflow. But here is a catch. Our package deployment jobs are outside this reusable workflow. These are in the main workflow that calls the init job, right? So how do we access those job outputs outside of the init workflow? That's exactly where workflow outputs come into play. Let's go back to init.yml. A reusable workflow in GitHub Actions doesn't just accept inputs, it can also define outputs. They allow reusable workflow like our init workflow to expose specific values like the flags or versions back to the main workflow that called it. This is what enables the main workflow to make a decision based on what happened inside a reusable one. So let me edit this, add an output section here just below the input section. Each output has a name. Let me give it a name, deploy underscore package one. Usually I use uppercase for the outputs of a workflow and lowercase for the outputs of a job or a step. And that's completely up to you. You can use any convention. There is no such rule that it has to be uppercase or this has to be lowercase. And every output has a description. This is an optional field, but if you want to describe what this output does, you can always use this flag. And I'll say deploy package 1. Simple description. And every output has a value. This is where you define what the output returns. In my case, what I want to return is this one, deploy package. And where do I get this? I get it under jobs. There is a job called init which sets output called deploy underscore package, right? So jobs dot init dot outputs dot deploy underscore package one. This is my first output. Let me do the same for package version as well. So here I will call it version underscore pkg1, and giving description is up to you. You can omit this if you do not want to. Let me update this variable value to package 1. I'm doing the same thing for all 5 packages. Let me just copy paste the code that I already have. So I have outputs for all the deployment flags and the version flags, version outputs. Let's commit the changes. So now this reusable workflow is setting outputs. We want to use them in the main workflow. I want these package deployments to be conditional based on the deploy flag set by this init job. So I'll add a condition here if. So I'll add a condition here. I'm using if, and the condition is if needs dot init dot outputs dot, what is the name of the output? Deploy underscore pkg1 equals true. If this is true, only then deploy this package. Otherwise, just ignore this deployment or skip this deployment. Let me add this condition for all the other jobs, but update the variable names here. Package 3, package 4, and 5. We also have this version, which is getting version from the init job. So let me do the same thing here. It's dollar needs dot init dot outputs dot version underscore pkg1. Let me do the same for all other packages. So let's see how this works. Let me commit the changes. Go to workflow runs and trigger the workflow. First, let's pass all the packages and click on run workflow. And let's see if all the jobs will be triggered properly or not. First, the init job is running. It gets the config file, which is just a simple output in our case. This is a dummy step. Now the actual step is running and we can see that the job is setting all these outputs. For some reason, these jobs are skipped. Let's go back to the code and see what we missed. Let me go to workflow outputs and needs.init.outputs. The spelling of outputs is wrong, so let's update it. Control F, outputs. I'll replace all, commit the changes. Now it should run, hopefully. View runs, run workflow. Okay, this is a required field. I'm passing all the packages. Init job is triggered. Okay, this is completed and we can see all other jobs are triggered because all these flags are set to true in our case. Now, let me go back and okay, let's see the uh, console log in this job, deploy web job, and I see package 1 with version 1.0. So the data is passed correctly. And this is 1.4. I can also check the job inputs. So the name is package 2, version is 1.4. Let's go back and trigger the workflow with just 2 packages, package 1 and package 2. Now run the workflow and refresh. Now we should see only package 1 and package 2 jobs running and other jobs should be skipped. So we see package 1 and package 2 getting triggered, package 3, 4, and 5 are skipped. And that wraps up our deep dive into workflow outputs in GitHub Actions. We saw how a reusable workflows can not only take inputs but also return outputs, and how those outputs can be used in the main workflow to control job execution dynamically. In our example, we passed a single string of package information, parsed it in the init job, and used workflow outputs to determine which packages to deploy and which versions to use. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment if you have questions or want me to cover more advanced GitHub action topics. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.